guys, it's Bryn. Welcome back to another video. I'm so excited today because we're doing another what I've been reading lately video, which I know these are not my most watched videos, but they're my personal favorites. I love telling you guys about the things that I'm reading. I do it all the time in like vlogs and stuff, so I like to just come and sit down and kind of go over like the last 5 or 6 books that I've read and just tell you a little bit about them, let you know like my final thoughts on these books. So thank you for letting me sit down and film one of my favorite videos to do. Even though I guess you didn't really give me permission, I'm just doing it, but you can tell I went to Whole Foods today because I picked up really weird flavored chips and one of those really weird drinks that you always see when you walk past it and you're like, I wonder what that is, I should try that, but then you never try it. Alright, so the first book I want to tell you about is The Darkest Legacy by Alexandra Bracken. This is the 4th book in the Darkest Minds trilogy, which I think might be one of my favorite book series of all time, mainly just because it's one of the few series I've read that gets like better as time goes on rather than like going downhill with every book. But anyway, the first 3 books came out quite a while ago. This one just came out recently, and it takes place after a time jump and from the point of view of a different character. The series as a whole is really about these kids who develop, I think, one of 5 different powers, from like mind control, telekinesis, I think maybe like ability to conduct electricity, is that one of them? But there are 5 different powers. And so the first 3 books in this series kind of take place in the immediate aftermath of that kind of happening, and these kids developing powers and their parents not knowing what to do with them and the country not knowing what to do with them. And then this one takes place after a time jump when they're kind of figuring out how to adapt them more into society, like how's the government gonna handle them, what kind of jobs can they have, and like they're trying to kind of take control of their future. Honestly, it's kind of scary to read this and see the similarities between our world now and our government and how they treat people that they deem as, you know, quote-unquote others. So it's always kind of freaky when you read like what's supposed to be a dystopian kind of book and it relates so hardcore to what's happening now. And you're like, this shouldn't be happening. I know it's done on purpose, but this shouldn't be happening. But anyway, you can read the book yourself and make your own decisions about that, I guess. As I said, this series as a whole is really one that gets better as it goes on, and like the more you get to know the characters and the more you kind of get involved in the world, the more you like it. In my personal opinion, it doesn't just like go off the deep end at some point. Like it just keeps building on itself and just getting better. You know, I always love, if I love a book, it's because I love the book's characters and I love just stories about teenagers and young adults that are able to just remain resilient throughout adversity. And this book just kind of fits perfectly in that sense to something I would like. If you want to read this one, I don't necessarily think that you need to read the others beforehand. So if you want to dive straight, like straight and right combined, you can dive straight into this one. I don't think it affects anything, but I do really like the first 3 books. You don't need that information to understand this one, but it does give you like a good backstory to why things are the way they are in this book. And also it has some of the same characters. The main character of this book is actually like a young kid in the first few books, so it's interesting to see like how she's changed over time. I do wish I would have gone back and read the first few books before I read this one just to kind of refresh my memory, but it wasn't like necessary. I still loved this book even though I had a hard time remembering what happened in the first few. Alright, now on to a book I still don't know how to pronounce. I think I've tried to say this like 12 times. It's either Caraval or Caraval. I have no idea, by Stephanie Garber. And I don't normally read like magical fantasy books. I tend to prefer, like I like fantasy books, but I tend to prefer ones that are more like grounded in reality, and the magic aspects of these ones just don't really do that for me. But this was recommended by a friend. A friend of mine read this and told me I should read it, so I picked it up and I read it. And my overall response to this book is that it was, I want to say weird, but that's not the right word. It's not that the story was weird, it was that I personally just didn't know how to react to it. So like when I sit down with my English major brain, there's so much I dislike about this book when I think about it. Like the characters weren't super believable, their motivations were kind of wishy-washy, their relationships and like the people they liked and their family relationships didn't make a lot of sense most of the time, and like the writing style was also really different. Like it got better as it went on. It was a little easier to digest and it wasn't so strange as it was in the beginning, but it started off very like sing-songy almost. Like it felt like it was pulled straight out of like a children's fairy tale and not like a young adult book or like, you know, a fiction book for people who have read books before. And also like the magic and the fantasy elements were a little all over the place, which when you think about it, maybe that was the point, but also that kind of thing just bugs me in general. With magical books, I always kind of struggle with the fact that magic can and can't be used at the author's discretion. Like they can decide, oh yeah, there's just gonna be this magic thing that poofs them out of this terrible situation, or like there's not going to be a magic thing, or this magic thing doesn't work in this scenario because of A, B, and C. And like, every book that I read that has magic in it is like held to the standard of Harry Potter, and like, just nothing hits that standard, so, you know, I struggle with it. Anyway, with all of that together, I really should have hated this book, but for some reason I didn't hate it. Like, despite its flaws, it was still wildly entertaining, and I found myself at the end of every day, like, excited to get into bed and keep reading this. Like, I read this so fast, and I can't figure out why. I mean, it's just kind of mysterious, both in terms of the story and, like, my reasoning for liking it. It's a mystery to me, I don't know. I guess it's kind of like a good reminder, to me at least, that not all books have to be incredibly substantive. Like, they don't always have to have a deeper meaning. They don't always have to teach you a lesson. Like, you can read a book purely for enjoyment, and it doesn't have to do something or make you think or anything like that. Like, you can just enjoy it, and that's fine. And this was a good reminder of that. The next book is one that I've been promising to read for a very long time, and it took me forever to get around to it, and this is The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. I am so late to the game with this book. I understand probably most of you watching this have already read this, so I'm going to try and make this quick. So your initial impression of this book was probably something like, it's about racism, it's about racial injustice, that sort of thing, and that's probably it, because that's kind of what my first impression was. I really thought it was just going to be, you know, about this one thing, and it was going to be good, but it wasn't going to be like something I really understood or something I really felt connected to, if that makes sense. What I didn't expect is that this book would also be about like the teenage experience and bravery and perceptions, just how you see and act and like experience things differently based on your environment, and how sometimes you have to be someone you're not just to protect yourself. There were just so many like lessons and thought-provoking ideas and messages throughout this book, and I was just blown away by it because it makes you think deeply about yourself, but also Star's life as a young black girl who has to live after watching her friends die and decide whether or not she should speak up for them. And it's hard because this is a perspective that someone who isn't black can try to empathize with, but can never really understand. But this book helps you try. Spending some time in Star's head, which by the way is great, she's great, it kind of gives you some clarity to what it might be like to live this life and for it to be normal, even though it should totally not be normal. Honestly, just like compared to most other YA books, this one is so deep and so thought-provoking, and I recommend like being in the right frame of mind before you read this. Before I read this, I was reading, I think, Caraval, and I was looking for something more entertaining, and so I had a really hard time at first just getting into this book because it wasn't what I was prepared to read at the time. Like, I thought this was gonna be more of just like an entertaining story that was also about racism, but like that wasn't what it was at all. Like, not that it's not entertaining, but it's just, I think it errs more on the side of thoughtful and thought-provoking, so I would be in that frame of mind and be ready for that kind of book before you read this. But whatever kind of books you normally read, I don't care, you have to read this at some point. Just saying. Alright, how many times and in how many ways can I talk about the lovely story that is Jenny Han's To All the Boys I've Loved Before? I know teen romance books can be a little like bubblegum, cookie cutter, sugar without much substance, but they can be so fun to read. Like, speaking of just books for pure entertainment, like I love to just pull these books out every so often just for fun. Like, I just want something that's going to be a quick read that I'm going to enjoy and maybe pull me out of a book slump, or just like get me through some books really quickly, because I'm just eager to read things and be entertained by things, but not so much to like think too hard. So I love these kinds of books every so often, especially if they're done well. And this story, both the book and the Netflix movie, are so great. The characters are so great. Like Laura Jean is the epitome of teen girl, hopeless romantic, who's just too shy to say anything to any boy ever, which I kind of really relate to, just a little bit. And somehow this book just like, it takes all the really popular tropes that you see in YA romance books, but makes them feel more like familiar and sweet rather than cliche or cheesy. And I just think that's impressive. Like, I think that's what makes this book stand out, is that like so many romance books are just like, I sit there and I read them and I'm just like cringing so hard, and like I enjoy some of it, but then, you know, you're just like, I don't know, maybe I just like love and relate to Laura Jean personally. But there's 3 books. I'm actually currently reading the second one, so probably the next time I do one of these videos, I'll tell you about the second and the third one. If you watch the Netflix movie and you're curious whether you want to read this book now, they do follow each other fairly closely. I wouldn't say they're like night and day difference. There's just, as there usually is, some things in this book that didn't make it into the movie. Also, I'd say Peter's character's a little different. I mean, they're similar, but they're not exactly the same. But yeah, if you watched the Netflix movie, you really loved it, I would recommend reading these, just because you get 3 books, so it's like extended, and you can just kind of extend your experience and your time with these characters, which I love. Also, if you haven't seen either and you're worrying about which one to check out first, I don't think it matters. You can do whatever you want. They're both great. I love the movie. I think I've watched it. Actually, I'm not going to tell you how many times I've watched it. Let's just move on to another book. Alright, now for a book that I actually can't show you because I read it as an audiobook. This is actually, I think, the first fiction book that I've ever read, like, in an audiobook form. If you can call that reading, right? I listened to a book, I still read the book. The book is Eleanor, Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. And if you love character-driven books by characters that are like quirky, maybe a little unusual, you should read this book. It's fun, it's funny, there's little like hints of mystery kind of throughout. And while I can't say it's like one of the most exciting and engaging books I've ever read, but I did read it really slowly, so, you know, take that with a grain of salt. I will say though, I don't think it was supposed to be like, it wasn't supposed to be like a super grabby, like exciting, intense kind of book. It was supposed to be about this character, and Eleanor is this woman with a mysterious past that no one knows about, and she's very quirky, she's very weird, not very like socially aware, and no one knows why, so they kind of just avoid her, and you know, she doesn't have many friends or things like that. She just kind of lives her own life, but essentially like she's grown up with little to no understanding of like societal social norms. Like one of my favorite examples is at one point she goes to this department store to get a new outfit, and the lady tells her to go to the makeup counter and get her makeup done. And so she goes to this counter and gets her makeup done by this woman who she continuously refers to throughout the book as Bobby Brown. Also, like a big part of the book is she falls in love with this musician, and at one point she like goes and buys a computer so she can stalk him on Twitter, and at some point I'm pretty sure she like actually thinks he's talking directly to her. So it's very like dry humor, very British humor, and I loved it. The story is very just like simple and lovely, but there's just like little points of just stuff that is so funny that I laughed out loud. Also, if you're looking for an audiobook to read, the narrator of this book was amazing. She was so funny. She did the voices so well. It was great. So, yeah. All right, and lastly, we have a book that I finished yesterday. This is The Power by Naomi Alderman. What do I say about this book other than it was nothing like I expected? This book imagines a future thousands of years from now where women develop this power of they are able to conduct electricity, and thus they kind of slowly become this like dominant race in the world. What makes this book unique, it's not necessarily the characters or the plot itself, It's the way it kind of reimagines our current day society flipped on its head, where women kind of hold the power, both literally and figuratively. And this switch kind of changes everything from religion to politics to war to the way men start to feel afraid when they walk down the street, or women start taking credit for their work. It's just really interesting. It's very thought-provoking. Like, the tone of it kind of sits somewhere between fiction and like historical nonfiction, where you know it's a story, but it's also told not quite like it's a story. Like, this is something that really happened, and I don't know, it's hard to describe. If this sounds at all interesting to you, I recommend just reading it. It does take a while, or took a while for me to get into, just because I wouldn't say the story was like over the top exciting by any means, but I would like go back and reread this again just to pick up on the little things that maybe I missed the first time. It talks about gender dynamics, and not so much in the way that it's like a male problem or it's a female problem, but that it's a human one. And I don't know, it just made me think a lot, and it's definitely something that I will be passing on to family and friends for them to read, because it was really interesting and thought-provoking, and I really liked it. Alright guys, that's everything for this video. I'm so bummed it's over. I love talking about books so much. I could film these videos all the time. Also, don't forget, if you want to keep up with these a little more in time and not so much after the fact, I do update everything on Goodreads, so you can always keep track of like what I'm reading right now and like what I'm reviewing things as I go. And also, if you haven't checked out my blog yet, I'll leave the link somewhere. I do recaps every month of all the stuff that I've read, watched, listened to, all of the entertaining things that I consumed every month. So those go up at the end of a month, beginning of the next month, and I always put little book reviews in there as well. So those are ways you can kind of keep up with me a little more up to date, maybe. But yeah, I hope you still enjoy these videos anyway, because I love talking about books. I love telling you about the books that I've read. If you've read anything recently, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear about it. I think that's all for now. So I will see you very soon with another video. Bye guys!